This is a Bergen Film Club podcast.
Like an old movie removed from the frame, I am floating and looking for someone to blame. Won't you project me on the walls of your heart? I'm waiting for the real thing to start.
Hello! Welcome to The Real Thing. I'm your host, Dor Lawrence. The Real Thing is an extension of Bergen Film Club, which is a film society in Bergen, Norway. Our goals are to show films, particularly those that we think deserve a spotlight, giving a voice to those who deserve it, shining a light on female and non-binary and other directors, and most importantly, showing really good films. So, Bergen Film Club recently showed 3 Hong Sang-soo movies in one day. Tale of Cinema from 2005, The Novelist film 2022, and In Our Day in 2023. So we are going to do a special episode highlighting the director, the mysterious, luxurious, sensual Hong Sang-soo. So we're going to be getting into that today. That's what we're going to be talking about. Just off the top, as usual, Andreas and I did the research for this episode, but also a special shout out to Per, our resident editor on the film board. Per is a huge Hong Sang-soo fan, and I feel like that's even being a bit diminutive is something more. Biggest fan of Hong Sang-soo, possibly. So he helped a lot on the research, very much pointing us in the right direction. So thank you to Per for helping the research. We used a lot of different sources for this episode, all of which will be in the show notes, but particularly I'm gonna just quickly shout out Ryan Sven and Dennis Lim, which are 2 film critics who are both very big fans. It's also very diminutive way of saying they are very big fans of Hong Sang-soo, but Dennis Lim has written a book about Hong, which I'll put a reference to in the show notes, and Ryan Swen has also written a lot about Hong. So I would like to point you in those directions and also to those sources as well if you want to read more about this very interesting guy. Particularly the New Yorker has an article written by Dennis Lim from 2022 called Hong Sang-soo Knows If You're Faking It, where I got to learn a lot about him as a person and his quirks, and it's a very funny article and very insightful, so go to that. But yeah, let's get into this episode. Who is Hong Sang-soo? So writing for The New Yorker, Richard Brody described Hong as one of the most original directors in the world. But who is he? So I'm going to start off with a little bit about him, his biography, and his life before he was a filmmaker. It is said that he is one of the most prolific and acclaimed contemporary film directors from South Korea, and whilst he hasn't gained the same mainstream appeal as his peers like Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook, his films have become a staple of the festival circuit. He has directed over 30 feature films in his nearly 3-decade-long career, sometimes releasing as many as 3 features in one year, 2017, to be specific. He is the writer and director of all of his films and has equally served as a producer, editor, and cinematographer on many, serving in all of these roles in his most recent films from 2021 onwards. He's basically doing everything. He is one of the most prominent voices on the international festival circuit, and his films often premiere at these prestigious film festivals like Berlinale, Cannes, Toronto Film Festival, etc., etc. He was born in Seoul in 1960 and spent the majority of his young life in South Korea in Seoul. His parents owned and operated the film production company Cinetel Seoul. Despite growing up in this environment, Hong initially entered and studied theatre at Chung-Ang University in Seoul, but quit after just 1 year of attendance. In 1982, when he was 22, he moved to the US and took a bachelor's degree at the California College of Arts and Crafts. It was during this period he began to make his first short films, which already exhibited his strong interest in experimental filmmaking, challenging the established norms of the time. During his years abroad, he also discovered the films of Robert Bresson, a director whose films made a very big impact on the young Hong. As a student, he mostly experimented with, quote, very strange short films, end quote, as he described them. Upon discovering Bresson's films, Hong's films were mostly non-narrative. Speaking about seeing Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest for the first time, Hong has said, quote, when I saw it, I was so happy because it's kind of a narrative film, but it reaches a certain level that I've never experienced. That gave me a real encouragement. Okay, maybe I can make a film with a narrative, end quote. He has also spoken of his first encounter with French painter Paul Cézanne as a young student. Hong has expressed a fondness, especially for Cézanne's still lifes of apples and fruits, and that these paintings influenced him as an artist. Upon completing his master's at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, he then spent 1991 in Paris, reportedly spending the majority of his time watching old European films in the French cinematheques. In addition to Robert Bresson, he also mentioned directors like Eric Rohmer, Jean Renoir, John Ford, and Luis Buñuel as filmmakers that he admires. He then returned to Korea after this time in Paris, where he worked for his Paris production company as a TV show producer. During this period was when he wrote and directed his first film, The Day a Pig Fell into a Well, in 1995. This catapulted him into the regard of the Korean filmmaking industry. This film, which is described as a, quote, innovative and darkly humorous, end quote, film, which was written by 4 separate writers, each of whom is responsible for the development of one character. The film highlights Hong's first foray into his own particular filmmaking style, which allows a degree of improvisation from himself from both sides of the camera. Or rather, I mean, not improvisation, but he has quite a distilled way of making films, which we'll come to talk about. His 2004 feature film, Woman is the Future of Man, was the first of his films to screen at the main competition of the Cannes Film Festival. This film was screened at Cannes alongside Old Boy, directed by Park Chan-wook, marking the first time that 2 South Korean films were in the competition simultaneously. Woman is the Future of Man did not win any awards and was met with mixed reviews in contrast to Old Boy, which won the grand prize. But this was not the last time the Hong's films would be in competition at the prestigious film festivals like Cannes. Around 2005, Hong founded his own production company, Jeonwon Film Production Incorporated Limited, quote, with the intention of establishing an efficient and economical system that is most appropriate for the style and scale of this director's films, based on director Hong Sang-soo's previous experience, end quote, which is taken from their Facebook page. Essentially, this is creating a way to facilitate his filmmaking style, since his films can be quite particular in the production stage, with his budgets rarely exceeding $100,000. So now we're going to talk a little bit, or a lot actually, about his filmmaking process and his style, maybe some criticisms that can come from that, and just learn a little bit more about this dude. I'm going to give my own thoughts as well. So namely, as I said, he has made over 30 films in about 3 decades, which is very many films in a very short amount of time. So we're thinking, how does he work so fast? So firstly, as we said, he's always working with a very small budget, which is usually self-financed from the money that he's gotten from his previous film or from teaching in South Korea at the university that he teaches at. Just to call back to that New Yorker article, he talks a lot about that in that article, and it's very funny and very dry. The reasons why he teaches is basically just to get money, which is respectable. He does most of the craft behind the camera himself, and he's surrounded himself with a handful of actors who understand his approach to filmmaking. Long ago, he stopped writing traditional scripts, but he rather creates an outline for a story based on an idea, place, a person, or an inspiration. He then spends only a few days in production, often writing each day's scene before sunrise, which he then shoots with his actors throughout said day. Like I kind of accidentally said, you would think that this would allow a lot of improvisation, that rather it's sort of like a sketch of a scene where they follow the skeleton of it and they kind of fill in the blanks, but it's actually rarely the case. The actors are expected to follow the scenes as it is written, even when they are drunk, which happens occasionally or pretty often in his films, as they are often drinking real alcohol while filming. This is all the more impressive when you realize how much dialogue is in each of his films, where a lot of the scenes are taking place over many bottles of soju, where characters' inhibitions fade away and open up for these very awkward confrontations, which these conversations in his films are can be noted for example. And this became kind of a fun game of the Hong films that I have been watching, is I was trying to guess if they were drunk or drunk acting. So if you watch any of his films, then I recommend playing that game as well, because it was quite fun. Because I think doing drunk acting is very hard to do right. Markedly, Evan Peters in Mayor of Easttown does drunk acting very well. So I was trying to figure out if in these Hong movies that the actors are just wasted or if they're just very good. Maybe both. So when it comes to his style and this concept of repetition in his films, the main takeaway from a first watch of a Hong film is that you are struck by the various elements of his style and form, which are kind of very clearly presented. Particularly charmed by the way that he is framing conversations, having these bodies on either sides of tables, with the table often littered with soju bottles. He places the camera just off to the side, as if you're looking in on the conversation, almost eavesdropping, as the character's inhibitions are slowly slipping away in conjunction with their exponential inebriation. While many filmmakers would shoot scenes like this with close-ups and shot reverse shots, Hong keeps his distance to let the camera shoot for long periods, so you feel like you have a seat at the table. These scenes that are consisting of long-form, uncut conversation are a staple in Hong's filmmaking, where men, which are often filmmakers, programmers, or critics, part of the film industry in some way, are often lost in their own egocentric lives and are often talking down or talking over women. Hare very lovingly wrote that Hong's male characters are frequently pathetic, and sometimes the women are too. But the most important thing to note is of these pitiful characters is that they feel very real. For me, this is one of my favorite things in films, is kind of being drawn into something that I would objectively call boring or mundane, but the director or the writer has created something of substance, of essence, that you kind of can't look away from. And I particularly felt that I was watching a Novelist film, because the conversation scenes of that are very long and they just kind of go and go, but you don't want to look away. There was like times that I was enjoying what was happening so much that I didn't want it to end. I guess I was enjoying the conversations that they were having, namely in a Novelist film, when the novelist is kind of having this confrontation with this director that she knows, who didn't greenlight her movie and said that he didn't have anything to do with the reason that the movie didn't get the go-ahead. And she's like just giving him some shit over something that he said to an actress, and it's just great. It's just perfect, and it's super uncomfortable, but it's so well delivered by the lead actress, and that's just very fun. Also, I'd just like to know, I don't know this director's name off the top of my head, but the director of the movie Memoria, that movie has really long scenes, but I felt you just are happy to sit into this world that they've created, and you're just enjoying the experience, which I think is wonderful when a movie can do that. As these scenes stretch on, Hong's camera can suddenly start to move, either pan through from one person to the next, or zoom in on a face, a bottle, or even a cat. Zooms and pans are synonymous with Hong. And while many other filmmakers use these tools, it has a very particular quality when used by Hong. Where, for example, David Fincher uses a digital zoom as a highlighter, marking or underlining objects of importance, Hong uses it more as a form of punctuation. It can stand as a comma, a semicolon, or a period, but it's always almost always in conversation with the talkative characters the camera captures within the frame. Hong uses form in a manner that often calls attention to itself. The zooms and pans are rarely hidden. Their abruptness or sudden movement is very much core to Hong's language. A perfect example of this is in an early scene in The Woman Who Ran from 2020. Here, a man visits a woman and they talk outside the door of her apartment. The scene is almost 5 minutes long and it's framed so we only see the man's back and the woman's face, totally stationary. In the bottom of the frame, we sometimes see a cat move in and out of view and the characters remark on what the feline animal is up to. More women enter the frame, but the camera remains still. As the scene draws to an end, after about 4.5 minutes, everyone leaves the frame and the camera stays on the door for a few seconds before it zooms in on the cat in the bottom left of the frame, and the scene ends. Hong knows how to use the camera to convey the necessary information to allow us an entry point to the characters of significance and, crucially, to be funny. A notable one for me is from The Tale of Cinema, where the opening shot of the city gives us the setting, but the ambling nature of the narrative for me is sort of like confirmed the way that we meet the first protagonist, that he's just like everyone else on the street. It just happens to be him that we follow. Another way in which Hong calls attention to himself as a filmmaker is in the way that he plays with structure. Indeed, it's one thing that people usually remark on his repetition within films, but also throughout his filmography, like thematic repetition and literal repetition itself. Many of his films tell the same story or tale twice, sometimes more, with only minor adjustments in perspective or context. His second film, The Power of Gangwon Province, tells the story of a man and the married man she has recently broken up with. In the first part of the film, it follows the woman and her friends as they visit Gangwon Province, where they get drunk and then the woman almost sleeps with a policeman. In the second part, we follow the married man, who the woman until recently had an affair with. As he visits Gangwon Province, it becomes clear that they were on the same train to the region and other symmetries and synchronicities appear without them actually meeting. In Right Now, Wrong Then, from 2015, which is perhaps the most approachable of Hong's bifurcated narratives, or at least, at the very least, the one that's the most discernible in its doubling. In this film, a male director meets a young female artist and they talk. At the film's halfway point, it starts again from the beginning with only minor and slight alterations to the same meeting. In most of Hong's work, there are various permutations of the same story, and sometimes they echo from one film to the next. A character from one film can remind you of someone from an earlier work, and they don't always confirm nor deny such suspicions. I said that those critiquing this repetition can often fall short, because Hong's use of this is to open up his work to kind of an endless rewatch and extrapolations, in which each of his work become a dialogue between one another. Repetition becomes a structuring game, a way in which you can watch and rewatch Hong countless times and always unearth new pieces of the puzzle. While watching one film by Hong, it may reveal some of his tricks. It is difficult to judge his work on that alone. In this vein, I think it's possible to note a change in himself. So the selection of films that pair programs for Bergen Film Club, we have a film from 2005 and then the next one picks up in 2022. And I think you can notably see a change in Hong himself, even though his films aren't autobiographical or about himself. Obviously, everyone writes from their own experience, but I think his outlook has very obviously changed, and you see that he's gone from a complete nihilist to a slightly more optimistic nihilist, I think. Like a nihilist in a funny way, maybe. For those on Hong's wavelength, the repetition is often what entices people to dive deep into and rewatch and watch again his 30-plus feature films within weeks of one another. Yet it would be reductive to imply repetition is all he's good for, but rather the opposite. Through his predisposition for repetition, changes and evolutions will emerge, whether it is in the way that he uses sharp, oversaturated black and white cinematography in the Novelist's film to envelop his characters in white, only to end on a romantic declaration of stylistic ingenuity, or the blur in his recent film In Water, in which the entire film is essentially shot out of focus, making it more akin to an oil painting than anything else, while simultaneously telling us more about the characters in the film than any line of dialogue or focus shot ever could. He loves to play around with form and style, whether it is from the perspective and smart metafictional shift in The Tale of Cinema, where an almost unnoticeable shift in diegetic sound reveals a structural change in the story, or the way in which the simply drawn title card sets up the punchline to a joke that will come in the following scene. In Our Day, he's always curious, always insatiable, and forever endearing. Very nicely written. There is, of course, much more that can be said about the ways in which his films look or sound or the work overall, but hopefully this has kind of enticed you to explore Hong's films further yourself. I should note that it cannot be, if you have any interest in Hong at all, if you just want to learn more about him, it's very good recommendation that you read his Dennis Lim's book on Hong that's called Tale of Cinema from 2022. And while titled after 2005, Dennis's cover of Hong's entire career up to a Novelist film, it's undoubtedly the best text written on Hong yet. That's kind of a summation, I guess, of some of his works, and kind of just like a little distilled version of like his filmmaking process and style. I guess in terms of my thoughts, I was perhaps a little bit unsure what to think. I do have a film podcast and I do watch a lot of films, but I'm not sure that I'm so deep in the kind of like, in terms of the festival circuit and those kind of films and this sort of like, that I feel like it's fair to say that Hong is kind of like a filmmaker's favorite, or like a critic's favorite filmmaker, but maybe, as we said, in sort of like larger sense, like I had never heard of him, so I kind of didn't really know what to expect. But recently, I think I've noticed like a change in the way that I have been watching films, that I'm a bit more chill about it. Like, and this shift in my life actually recently came because I watched Inland Empire, and I was so by David Lynch, and I was so like affronted and kind of like, okay, I need to find the meaning in this. But as the film went on, I was kind of like, I don't need to know. I can just enjoy it. And I think that really kind of changed something in my head. And I think that's very stupid and silly in a way, that change for me has come from watching Inland Empire. This like 3-hour fevered nightmare. So I think having watched that and then watching Hong the next day was like a good coupling, because I think it allowed me to enjoy the films, because you say it's like slice of life and you sort of drop into these characters' lives, which is very much how it felt. You just kind of, the camera sort of ambles to them and you're sort of just like, okay, I'm watching this now. They're sitting there and I'm watching them. And yeah, I think he creates this kind of very real dialogue, which just feels so endearing and captivating, I guess. Yeah, I ended up really enjoying it, and I love zooms. Like, I've always really enjoyed like these kind of 80s horror films, I guess. Like, I love like a fast zoom, where it's like, I think now people can view it as kind of being a bit like slapstick and silly, but I think there's power in zooms. So I love that, and I was very pleased to see a lot of that in this film. And also, I was just lastly just very impressed. I think a Novelist film is probably my favorite one out of the ones that I've seen, because I love the idea of the story, and I was just so impressed by these really long scenes. I was just thinking like the actors must get Hong so well, and there must be just a really good level of understanding there. So it was very cool. And also Tale of Cinema, the film, I liked that as well. And this kind of like change in the plot was super, like, I didn't expect that to happen at all. I was just kind of going along with it, and then all of a sudden it's like very meta, and also like a little bit Lynchian. I think I'm forever going to have that kind of that comparison in my head, that Inland Empire and Mulholland Drive are kind of tale of cinema. Yeah, I'm going off on a tangent there, but I think that I liked it. I did like it, and I hope to see more and keep enjoying and kind of explore his filmmaking more. So I guess thanks, Per, for putting this out, and I hope that if you did come to BFK and you saw these films, that you enjoyed them, and that if you have not seen a Hong movie, that this inspired you to go watch them, because I think there's plenty to get through, and there will be plenty more over the coming years, and there's a lot to read about him and a lot to understand, and I just think it's nice to have filmmakers like Hong, I think, that are kind of doing their own thing, very much doing their own thing, and it works very well. And it's so impressive that he makes like so many films, and it seems like the level of it is always the same, like the quality is never lost. So yeah, but I enjoyed this. It was very, like, I love doing these episodes, just kind of diving into directors and kind of like learning about their lives and their styles. In some future episodes, actually, we're going to do that again. I know that the Sai Bay episode was received very well, so that was very nice that people liked that. We're going to redo an episode, I believe, and we're going to do some more as well. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you learned something. If you want to go follow the podcast, it's at The Real Thing Pod on Instagram, because Twitter is shit. Don't use it. Do not support that man. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. All of the information will be in the show notes if you want to like explore any of the texts anymore. But thank you very much for listening. I've been Joe Lawrence. This has been The Real Thing. Goodbye. This has been a Bergen Film Club production. Our music is by Wise John. Check them out on Instagram at WISEJohnOfficial. Our logo is by Pia Sofia Brentersen. This episode was produced, mixed and engineered by Joe Lawrence. Our researchers are Inke Shilprai-Ben and Mamina Nazmajid. Want to talk to us about films? Then please send us an email at podcast@bergenfilmclub.com. Follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at The Real Thing Pod. Check us out on Letterboxd at BFK The Real Thing. Thank you and goodbye. Listen, follow, leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts.